Hello, I'm Sheila Guillotone, and this is the Simsbury Woman. Life changes. There's no way to stop that. And sometimes the changes are planned. Graduation from school, marriage, starting a family, accepting or changing jobs, moving. Despite the fact that many of these changes are planned for positive reasons, going through those changes can still be stressful. And then there are the unplanned changes. We aren't always prepared for some of those, like illness, death, separation, and divorce. The stress of those changes can be overwhelming. My guest today is Susan Levine, and she's a returning guest to the Simsbury Woman. Many of our viewers will recall her previous interview, but that was several years ago, and of course, like everything else, things have changed. Today I want to ask Susan to talk specifically about coping skills, things we can and should do to get through the stress of those unexpected and more often than not unwanted changes. Susan is a counselor who helps women who are facing major life changes. She, with her clients, deal with changes that can be related to any number of issues: career, retirement, aging, bereavement, separation and divorce, even rehabilitation. Welcome, Susan. Before we get into the meat of the psychology, perhaps you would tell our viewers a little bit about how you came to this unique practice.
Thank you, Sheila. It's a pleasure to be here. I came to this unique practice through my own transitions. And part of why I chose the specialty of transition were from my experiences. I began as a musician, a music teacher, a singer. Then the calling of my career has been as a cantor, the clergy person in the synagogue who was in charge of all the musical liturgy, as well as pastoral care and partnering with rabbi in ritual and education. And during that time, I sought to enhance my education with counseling skills because my congregants were coming to me with difficulties. And I knew how important it was to respond not only out of what I felt in my heart, but out of skills to be able to be the most useful, especially in pastoral care. That led to not only my degree from the University of St. Joseph, but also being part of Bethany Pastoral Counseling Services, in addition to my synagogue work. Then many years later, when I retired, I looked to what I was going to do. And I thought, I had this opportunity to form my own counseling practice. And with that, I thought of women. I've always related to women's issues. As a woman in a previously all-male profession, my experiences have drawn me to some of the unique things that women go through.
Of course, your education, it would allow you to counsel anyone.
Absolutely.
But you chose women as a personal interest.
It was really choosing that, what we call an ideal client, the people that you just feel out of your, not only your education, but your experience and what you relate to. And so I chose women, and I chose transition, and that became Women Reshaping Lives. And
very good.
That was 5.5 years ago.
Well, congratulations. There are so many different issues that you cover. I kind of want to start with what I guess we would call bereavement. And I had told you the story. I've had two friends, one of whom had a husband who died after a very protracted illness where she was the primary caregiver. And another friend who literally that same week that the first man died, her father-in-law was rushed to the hospital and was dead by the time they got there. From an aneurysm. So, and he'd been out playing tennis the day before. So I'd like to talk a little bit about the stress of a long protracted illness and how you deal with that, and then the death as a result, and then the shock of a sudden, unexpected death, and sort of compare and contrast the coping skills that, and I guess how it affects everyone differently, I assume?
Yes, it does.
Okay.
It does, because all of our transitions, whatever it is, and especially bereavement, they get filtered through our own self-beliefs, our histories, all of the things that are our stories, our life stories, and how we handle things, and how we fall to resilience to help us cope with things. In the case of being a caregiver during a long illness, there's, our adrenaline kicks in the caregiving and the being there at the hospital.
I mean, I'm talking months.
Yes, yes.
Months,
absolutely.
Like at home, running to doctors, and
Sure,
I mean, that's got to wear you down.
Absolutely. In fact, that does wear any caregiver down tremendously. You get very, very depleted. And yet, you're constantly on guard.
Of
You're
course.
really on guard. At that time of separation of death, there's the adrenaline just drains away, and then you're left with the loss. But the loss is connected to that hospital experience. And so there's a depth to it that can leave someone quite immobilized in terms of trying to figure that all out. Even what are the images of your loved one that you hold? Is it, of a healthy, vibrant person that you loved, or the sick, dying person that you were caring for at the end?
Now, how do people who are just watching the situation, I mean, I really wanted to stress with this conversation the coping skills. But you've got coping skills for the person going through it, but you also have, people who are just friends who go, what do we do?
Yeah. And I think that's such a good question, that people are so shocked themselves. Friends are so shocked. And what do we do? What do we say? There's almost like a kind of desperation to fill that void.
Right.
And yet, actually, it's not the words. It's the actions. It's the kindness. It's bringing a meal. It's just giving a hug.
Yeah, okay.
And it's listening.
Okay. I don't know if it's me. It's probably not just me. But the other thing is, you kind of feel like you don't want to interfere. Like, to go over and, if I go over, am I going to disturb something? Do they have a routine that I might disturb? I mean, you kind of, in a way, stay away, not because you don't care, but because you do care.
And sometimes what happens, we get into that place of, in some ways, trying to be a mind reader. What if? What if they're busy? What if
exactly.
But rather than feeling that way, ask, call. You just, if you're going to stop by, call. Okay. Before you stop by. And say, I've been thinking of you, would love to stop by with something, or just to talk, or how are you doing?
Okay.
So, in fact, that encourages the other person to be able to tell you what they need. Okay. Whether they need that alone time, or whether they need a visitor.
If someone says, I really don't want to see anyone today, you take them at their word?
Yeah, well, you can, absolutely. But you can also add to that, I'll give you a call in another day or so. And perhaps you'll be feeling a little stronger and able to come and talk.
Okay. All right. So that's the long And then I would assume there's probably a correlation of trying to get over the loss to the amount of time you spent waiting for the loss, if you will, through a long illness. So
it's anticipatory grief, actually, when you're going through that.
Okay, that's a word I never heard before, but
That's
okay.
right, but it is anticipatory grief.
Okay.
And sometimes, because we know that we're going through an anticipatory grief, we may have an expectation that the actual loss will be buffered in some way.
Okay.
That's not necessarily true.
Oh,
a
okay.
loss is a loss.
Yeah. Now, one thing I've often heard is that everyone grieves in a different way. Is that true?
Yes, they do.
Oh, okay.
While there are, similarities, there are certainly, we know about, steps that people go through, but we don't always experience them in the order that they've learned that they were laid out. It may be just, we may be triggered by certain things, triggered by certain memories that are catch us by surprise. We know that first holidays are very difficult.
Of course.
Any firsts during that first year of grieving. But there's so many other things. You might be in a store and reflect back on a time that you were with your loved one, or see something that your loved one liked, and it will bring on tears.
Okay.
Those are important things.
And it seems to me there's also a cultural element, because I know I was raised by actually my grandmother. You don't cry in public, and everything is hidden away. And you get criticized for that by other cultures, people who are raised differently. And that's difficult for someone to deal with, because suddenly you're criticizing the victim.
Yes. It can be very difficult. What are these expectations? That it's okay to cry, it's not okay to cry, it's okay to feel what I'm feeling, it's not okay to feel what I'm feeling. And also what enters into that is others' uncomfortableness.
Yes.
With loss, with grieving.
Yeah.
What do I say? What do I do? Oh, isn't she over it by now? Yes.
Yeah.
You can relate to that.
I've heard that. And
yet it has its own time frame.
Okay.
And its own, evolution. And it changes.
Right.
In fact, grief, our loved ones who we've lost are always with us. And we always miss them. That grief doesn't go away, but it changes over time.
Okay.
And over being able to express what you're feeling.
Okay.
And that's why the counseling, the therapeutic session, is a place for someone to come and feel safe.
Okay.
And free to express whatever they're feeling.
Okay.
And that could be anger.
Right.
How could you leave me?
Yeah. I'd like to throw things now. And you can do that.
Yeah.
Right.
It could be anger. It could be if I start to enjoy my life in any way, shape, or form, am I being disloyal?
I've heard that too, yes.
Absolutely. Am
Yeah.
I being disloyal? How can I even imagine myself having a life without my loved one? And even dealing with the larger question is, how do I explain the unexplainable? The why.
Yeah. So let's talk about the differences that might occur from a sudden loss. Someone's perfectly healthy one day and is dead the next. Maybe an accident, maybe an aneurysm, or something. There's an element of shock that clearly you wouldn't have with the long, protracted illness. How do you cope, and what are the differences in how you relate to that person?
Well, there's definitely shock.
Right.
There's denial. There's numbness. There's, how could this happen? this isn't fair. How could this happen? Which actually also happens, that
Sure.
this isn't fair, why did this happen? Can happen in any situation.
Exactly.
We look to that, and yet what happens is when we ask that kind of question, we kind of get a little stuck. And
is there an answer?
is there an answer? Are there mysteries that we don't have an answer for? And so, rather than we keep kind of getting tangled up in why did this happen, rather than saying, what do I do?
Okay.
And what do I do is the harder question.
Yeah.
Because that requires action.
Right.
It requires doing something.
Yeah.
And it might be, the difficulty of getting out of bed in the morning. And going to work.
Yeah.
Or going out with a friend.
Okay.
Any of those things that maybe have been part of what life had been before the loss occurred.
Okay. Okay. Those are I would call unexpected losses that you don't really control. Let's talk a little bit about things like separation, divorce. Those are things that not only can you control, well, sort of control, I guess, but it's usually not just you involved, especially if there are children involved. So let's talk separation first, because that's usually how things start. How do you cope? And again, as a friend of someone, Joe and I are separating. What do you do? What do you say? I mean, it's hard not to take sides. And then the other thing, of course, is it's hard not to make the children, a tug of war kind of thing.
Yeah.
So what are the coping skills that someone who is suddenly faced, because it may come on suddenly.
It might, yes.
Yeah. And how do you deal with that?
Well, usually in a couple, what's happening is first in separation, that, one of the partners has been feeling unhappy, maybe for quite some time, and been chewing it over, and perhaps they've tried to have some conversations with their spouse. Perhaps not. Maybe the conversations have not led to any productive place.
Okay.
But the other partner is not aware of...
Now, how is that?
Well, maybe also in some denial.
Okay.
Of that. It's
That
not
makes
as
sense.
serious.
Okay.
It'll blow over.
Okay.
So that that can happen. It can also happen where both partners are really quite aware of what's going on with their marriage, and that things have changed for them. Some couples might go to couples counseling and to see, what those issues are, to work with a therapist.
I have a question. And I'm old enough now to remember a time when going to see a counselor or a therapist of any sort had a stigma attached to it. How has that changed, and how much has that changed?
I hope it has changed.
Well, I think, we say it's changed, but I'm wondering, deep down, are we thinking, gee, why didn't they just fix it? Or,
I think the stereotypes still remain.
It is.
Some of them may be a little bit more hidden.
Okay.
But I think they do remain. My view of counseling, therapy, is that it's actually a growing process.
Okay.
It's a healing process, absolutely. It's a discovery process, and it's a growing process.
So if something traumatic happens to you, your advice as a counselor is you don't bury it. You talk about it, and if you don't want to talk about it so that your friends or family know about it, a counselor is the perfect, because you have a confidentiality.
Absolutely. And so again, it's a safe space.
Okay.
We talked about that in the case of bereavement. Well, it's a safe space for someone to come, and that's why the fit with a therapist is so important.
Okay.
That you feel you have to build up that trust
Oh, yeah,
in working
sure.
together. And with that fit, you feel free. Oh, wow, it feels so much better to be able to say what I'm feeling. Oh, and I've had clients say, I feel like a weight lifted off my shoulders just by being able to say, I'm angry, or I'm sad, or I'm jealous or resentful, because it won't be met with a judgment.
Okay.
It'll be met with, let's explore it.
Okay.
Where do you feel it?
Yeah.
You know, and in fact, a very important part of therapy, I believe, is not just staying in your head, but kind of going deeper. Where do you feel it in your body? Where do you hold it?
Okay.
It could be stress in your jaw, in your shoulders.
Oh, okay.
Something in the pit of your stomach.
And stress, we know,
a heaviness in your heart.
Right, does bring on medical issues.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I mean, that's pretty much been established by the medical profession.
Sure,
That's
sure.
Okay, so we've been through separation. Now we go to divorce.
Yep.
And that adds just a wealth of different problems.
Yes,
One of the things I noticed on your website, which I thought was brilliant, was there are things that people don't realize are part of divorce, and things like financial arrangements, moving, and God help us, child custody agreements if you have young children. And I noticed that you not only have your own counseling issues, but you also have sort of a network of people who can help with things like the finances.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Talk a little bit about how you've managed to pull that all together, because it's a critical piece.
It is a critical piece, very critical. Well, I've been fortunate to meet lots of wonderful people and to actually do some speaking with them. I've talked a lot about emotions and finances, whether through bereavement or divorce. So, you know, even looking at that and being able to say, okay, when you're sitting down looking at numbers, those are hard, fast numbers.
Yeah.
And you need to kind of be centered in a different place.
Okay.
But know that your emotions, what you feel is what you feel, and attend to that as well.
Okay.
But separate the two.
So, as an Irish woman, I have a question, because my first reaction would be revenge.
And lots of times it is.
And the question is, do you ever have to deal with, like, talking people out of it?
You know, it's not about talking people out of it, but it's exploring it.
Okay.
So again, it's exploring the why.
Okay.
And usually revenge is maybe, you know, that you had certain expectations and those were unfulfilled.
Okay.
And so that made you angry.
Oh, yeah.
Hence the revenge. Or if it's infidelity, that's a huge
that I would
betrayal.
think. Right.
And so again, that anger, that revenge piece. But again, in our conversations, one of the things I do is, as we explore and we see where it is in our bodies and kind of get to know it a little bit more, that we kind of step back a little bit.
Okay.
And we do what I call kind of a little bit of a reframing, or refocusing, and looking at, what does your revenge do for you?
Okay. That makes me feel better. No.
Well, it may temporarily, but if you carry that revenge with you, how does that help you in your world?
Right.
Does it make you an angry, bitter person?
Yeah.
Is that who you want to be?
There you go. Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So let's move to something not quite as dramatic and talk about retirement. That should be a joyful, pre-planned, theoretically, event. Why does that suddenly become an issue as a change that brings stress?
Retirement forces us to look at a change in our identity. We've been associating with our identity with what we do for many, many years. maybe in
Okay.
a whole bunch of different capacities.
Okay.
Our society looks at that too. You know, the first question someone will ask you when you meet someone at any kind of event,
What do you do?
What do you do?
Right.
Well, they don't ask, who are you?
Uh-huh.
You know, what are you about? What do you
Okay.
like? What are your interests?
Right.
They ask, what do you do?
Uh-huh.
So that's a big change in identity, and that
Okay.
may leave us feeling lost and floundering.
Huh.
What do I do without my identity? Without my ability to say, I'm a lawyer, or I'm a
Okay.
teacher,
Right.
or whatever it is.
Yeah.
And then pairing that with, well, if I'm not that, who am I?
Okay.
So it's a time of looking again at, oh, who am I now?
Okay.
And what do I want? Lots of times when when people are retiring, they have a much firmer idea of what they don't want to do than what they do want to do. That's fuzzy. That's kind of cloudy. It doesn't
Okay.
have a form to it.
Right.
And there are also stereotypes there too.
Sure.
That retirement used to be.
Used to be, yeah.
Used to be.
On your way out.
Well, on your way out, it used to be, relocating,
Right.
Going to Florida or some other sunny,
Whatever,
warm
yeah.
place,
Right.
And enjoying those, what we call those golden years.
Right.
These days, financially,
Yeah.
it's not necessarily viable,
Okay.
but also if we want something that has meaning to us, that might not have the kind of meaning that fulfills us. So volunteering
Okay.
or working part-time or finding other things, being creative about it.
Okay. Well, as usual, we do not have enough time to explore all the coping mechanisms to help people, women specifically, deal with the unexpected changes that life throws at us. But thanks to people like Susan, there is available help when stress becomes overwhelming. And it is an accepted fact that overwhelming stress does cause both mental and physical problems. Sometimes we all need help, and failing to seek out help will most likely exacerbate the problem. Often just a calming presence and a little coaching from an experienced counselor is exactly what we need. I would encourage all of our viewers to visit Susan's website, which is womenreshapinglives.com, www first, of course, and it will give our viewers a more complete vision of the many different ways that a counselor like Susan can help. Remember, asking for help is not weakness. I hope our viewers have enjoyed this very brief look into a unique counseling service, and I wish all of you a happy and healthy day. Thank you for joining us.
Funding for Simsbury Community Television is provided in part by contributions from viewers like you. Thank you.